Welcome to La Barra, 23 Design's premier design podcast. We have some differences today. We're not recording this live because we have a special guest. We're also, as you may have noticed, we're also recording this in English. So I feel incredibly comfortable for the first time in my life.
Questions?
Instead of popcorn and beer, we have coffee because it's a beautiful morning here in Mexico City. And today we have members of the 23 Design team. We have Oli with us, we have Sarah, we have Amar, I'm Jonathan, and we also have Yasmine Evjen.
Hi everyone, bienvenidos.
Great. And a little bit about Yasmine. She is a UX designer by trade. And you're currently a design advocate at Google, which means that you basically are a proponent of human-centered design, Google's design sprint methodology, material design. So you go around kind of coaching designers with those things. You also were a host on Material, fantastic relay podcast about design in Google. And yeah, if you want to know more, we're going to put a link to your personal website in the show notes so people can check that out. So, anything else that I missed?
No, I think you actually said my job pretty well, which
Okay.
was the first thing, like when you get started with the job, you're like, wait, what do we do exactly? So thank you for telling me exactly
Sure.
that. It makes it easier.
that took me an hour of research.
Okay.
So my first question for you today is, you were once retweeted by Michelle Obama, which for me is like gold status. Like,
That was
if
pretty amazing. Yeah.
if that happens, you have done something really significant in your life. So where were you, and how did you find out that she retweeted you?
Yeah, so it was when it was her campaign of, oh goodness, what was the campaign? Now I'm going to forget the actual hashtag of it. But it was about encouraging women to get education as well as like code. I think it was, oh gosh, no, I wish I came prepared with the hashtag. But anyways, I retweeted, or I sent a message with like the hashtag of like, why I code, or like why I'm a part of tech, and I mentioned that I like to use design and code to solve problems. And so she retweeted that, and it was like a picture of me with an Android, and I remember getting the notification, and actually I had my phone off because I was at a thing in the morning, and I got out of the event, I looked at my phone, and I'm like, wait a minute, why am I getting like all these notifications, or why are people like mentioning me and Michelle Obama the same thing? Like, this is so weird. And then I realized, oh crap, like Michelle Obama retweeted me. That's amazing. So it was an initiative to trying to get more women into tech. So
Awesome.
so it was, yeah.
That happened yesterday for us when you retweeted La Barra.
Yeah.
Expectations are too low. Then. I think the like next thing where, I mean, Michelle, you can't really top Michelle Obama, but she doesn't follow me. She just retweeted me.
Yeah.
But when
Yes.
that's good. Yeah. It was when I joined Google and Matias Duarte actually started following me.
Okay.
Which was like, he's the VP of design at Google. So anyway, I was like, oh, it was so, even though you're part of the company, you're like, oh my gosh, this is happening. Yeah. So that was fun, yeah. So I still nerd out about those moments.
Cool. So apart from Michelle Obama, today's show will be about two things. We're going to be talking a little bit about material design, but we're also going to be talking about your role in design in Google. So the first question I have for you, for a serious question, is tell me about when you obviously applied for a position at Google, and when you got news that you were, you've been accepted. Where were you, and what did that conversation look like? Like, who was the first person that you told that, yes, I'm going to work for Google?
My husband, for sure, was like the first person that I reached out to. And then, well, let's backtrack a little bit because I don't want to give away. So when I first found out that I was interviewing at Google, and the process actually went pretty quick, which is not usually the case.
Okay.
And that's because shortly after I started the interview process with Google, I got a counteroffer. So I messaged them like, hey, obviously you're the top pick, but like I need a job. So, what are you wanting to move forward or whatnot? So they kind of rushed me through the whole process, even though it did still take a few weeks because Google's process is long. So if you are in the interview process, like, don't lose heart. It's not anything about you or the candidate. It's just a long process. but yeah, I mean, but once I got feedback on my interview and they wanted to bring me for an on-site interview, I had to prepare some work, and that was usually they give people a week to do to prepare the work that they present.
Okay.
And I had a weekend because they needed to get me in as
Sure.
soon as that. And the funny part about that is I had a weekend, and that weekend my husband was actually going out with his brother and dad to up north to a cabin. And so he is driving up north. He knows I'm waiting to hear back on the news and whether or not I'm going to get scheduled for the next on-site interview. And I'm calling him and I can't get a hold of him. So I have to text my brother-in-law. I'm like, can you tell my husband that I'm going to be flying out to Google next week,
Yeah.
anyways. But so definitely my family was always the first ones to know. And as soon as I did get the message back that I did get the job at Google, I called my husband right away and told him the good news and all of that. And then I actually had a hair appointment right after I got the news.
Yep.
So my hairstylist was the second one to know before my family.
I feel
Before
that's
the rest of
fairly
my
common,
family.
though.
So yeah, don't tell the rest of my family. But because I was like, if I text them now, I'm not going to be able to get my hair cut because they're going to be trying to call and everything. So I waited, and then afterwards I told them, I was like, but listen, I'm not ready to announce it to the world, so don't post it on Facebook or don't tell Nana Eva because she'll tell everybody. But yeah, so that was it was fun.
I always wonder how many hairstylists are the first or second person to receive really important
Information,
news. Yeah, because they're always there.
It is, and the interesting part about a hairstylist, if it's someone that you go with repeatedly, they are more in tune with your journey than most people because they hear all your stories.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, she was super excited for him. She's like, but yeah, we were just talking about the podcast and everything. Anyway, so it was just a really fun. So she celebrated with me. It was
Cool.
great.
And what your main feeling was excitement, or was there kind of nervousness of the responsibility? Because being, design advocate for Google, obviously you've got to make everyone believe, right? You've got to you are kind of this evangelist in that role. So how did that responsibility sit with you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for us it's less about making people believe as more as helping people.
Right.
So the role is very much more of helping designers and developers better build products on Google's platform. So it's not so much of oh gosh, if I don't convert 3 people or whatever, I'm gonna lose my job. No, that's not how it works. It's just more of helping and being involved in the community.
For sure.
Which I was already doing a lot of that.
Right.
So it was less of a fear in that regard. But yeah, it's definitely a feeling of excitement, and it was one of those feelings of I can't believe this is happening because you just don't. You don't, before joining Google, you're just oh my, Google seems so far away. At least for me, it felt that way. So being able to fulfill that dream was just kind of whoa, what's next now? It was a goal that I was always striving to that I never even anticipated reaching.
Sure. And
then now you're there and you're oh crap, I haven't thought what happens when you land,
Sure.
and stuff. So, but my husband's pretty good at being just enjoy your time. I'm very goal driven, so he's just just enjoy it. You did good, So he evens me out, so it's good.
And you finally met your heroes.
Yeah.
Well, my heroes.
Maybe more your
You talk about bringing developers and designers together, and I think that's a part of your job, right? And being a computer science major, I know that might be a little bit hard, bringing these 2 ways of thinking, analytical thinking and creative thinking together is a big challenge. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you do it and how do you approach what is your approach to bring them together?
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because I think that sometimes engineers can be one of the most creative people that you interact with. I think at the core, the essence, regardless if you're a designer or an engineer, your goal is to solve problems, and you just have different approaches on how to do that, which is the beauty of building products in tech, right? Because you're bringing all these skill sets and all these different ways of thinking and into actually moving forward with the problem that you're solving and the solution. We do a lot of that via the design sprint methodology, which is I held a design sprint workshop here on Monday in Ciudad de Mexico, and which was really great because the design sprint methodology really does bring everyone that's building products into the room, even beyond designers and engineers. You got product managers, user research, customer service, like all these people that interact with the product or the users or the people that are using your product. Bring them in the room so that everyone can bring in their own insight and share, think of ways of how to solve for it. I'd say the biggest hiccup that I have with when we are doing like design sprints with engineers is that it's very difficult for engineers to stop thinking of the solution, which is fine, I get it, because engineers, that's the way they're wired to work. Like that's your job, right? You're supposed to get a problem, and it's like, hey, usually a designer is like, hey, we want to do this, like, how can we do it? And the engineer brings in the technical aspect and all of that. So their minds are always geared on like, all right, how do I solve for this? Like, how do I do this? Where in the design sprint, we're like, stop, like, don't come with solutions, you come with questions.
Yeah.
Because you're really trying to think of new ideas that you wouldn't have thought of outside of that. So that's always the hardest thing, where it's just like, you don't have to have all the answers, just come with questions and try to refrain yourself from solving it. So that's one of the things. One of the tips that I always give to designers and developers is always sketching with pen, with some Sharpies and paper, because then you're not in the context of like the computer and programming or in Sketch building something, but it allows you to explore different ideas without getting married to a design or a different way of doing it.
Sure. Cool. Yeah, which is, I think it's such a big change for me, at least. Like, I came from a slightly more corporate world, and in the corporate world, you're constantly trying to prove that what you're going to invest in, be it time or money, is worth the investment. So you're constantly trying to look for those answers or those solutions really quickly. So this idea of like creating a methodology that leaves space for ambiguity and leaves space for us not to close in on the answer, but to kind of ask more questions, is such a shift in mindset for many people. And so is that sometimes difficult, like getting people to kind of buy into, okay, wait, great idea, but wait, we're going to kind of keep this ambiguous.
Yeah, it's funny because we kind of realized that a lot of it also depends on the region and where we're doing the design sprints, because a lot of cultures, there are a lot of cultures that do thrive on like, I don't know the answer, like let's go figure it out, like it's fine. Where in some other cultures, it's very much like you don't want to ever admit that you don't know the answer or ignorance and stuff. So it's really interesting when you're dealing with those dynamics, and we have to really intervene and be like, hey, like you're not dumb if you don't know the answer. Like that's good. You're asking questions. It brings more things, and so trying to educate people on that. It is very difficult. I think another thing that's very difficult too, that people think that when you do a design sprint, you're going to come out with a solution that's going to be like the best thing ever, and it's going to, this is like, wow, we spent this time and like we know now where we're moving forward.
Right.
But a lot of times, what we really focus on is you have these ideas and you validate them. So you actually do user testing within the design sprint, and a lot of times you find out we were wrong and users hate this, right? And like a lot of people are like, well, now we spent 3 days and we walked away knowing that they hated this idea, and they feel kind of like upset because of all this time. But I'm like, but now you didn't spend 6 months or 3 months developing this that would have never worked anyway.
Sure.
So I think there's still wins whether or not it's successful. We measure success in a sprint very different than people like moving forward with an idea or less. So yes, but it is definitely hard depending on the culture of the company that you're working with as well.
Sure. Tell me a bit about that, because obviously you do a lot of travel as part of your job, and you kind of are talking to lots of different people from different cultures. You're interacting with different design scenes in different places. So I find that really interesting that as the countries change, the kind of attitudes towards these kinds of things change as well. So can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, I haven't. So I can't really speak on here's what it was before and here's what it is now, just because a lot of the places that I'm visiting, I'm visiting for the first time.
Sure.
I mean, I've never been to Ciudad de Mexico. My family's from Sonora and Chihuahua. I spend a lot of time there in the summers, but never really gone that far south. So, and what I know is that like you can't really pinhole a whole country by visiting one city.
Right.
Because when we were in India, we visited 2 different cities, New Delhi and Bangalore. And one's in the south and one's up north. and there was still a lot of differences. There was still a lot of there's still a lot of similarities,
Right.
but still a lot of differences and everything. And I mean, I think even within different communities, you know, no one can fit into this box that you want to put them in. But it would be interesting to see as more people do, you know, latch on to kind of the design thinking and human-centered design of saying, hey, I might get this wrong, but that's the whole process of it, and we're always iterating it, versus the whole idea of like the design ego of like, I came up with this idea and it was perfect and look how beautiful it is. Like moving away from that. I hope that kind of changes a lot of that tech scene, design scene.
Yeah, for sure. Makes sense.
And I have a question.
Yeah.
What are the soft skills that Google looks for in a design?
Yeah, communication is the biggest one. I mean, especially for my role, of course, you have to be able to go out there and speak at events and kind of be involved in community. I'd say communication is probably one of the biggest ones, as well as not having an ego, right? Because, which is hard, right? Because you're like, we all know you're all amazing, but but it's really there. You know, when you're entering a company, whether that's Google or anywhere else, like, yes, you might be really talented at what you do, but there's other people that are super talented too that are with you. And if you think that you're going to be the only one driving everything, then you're going to have a very difficult time within that. I think even outside of Google, that. But I'd say that I always tell people that's like, you know, you could be an excellent designer, but work on your communication skills, because if you're not able to like articulate your design, you're going to have a very difficult time convincing people and also kind of being able to share your work.
Yeah, it's interesting. I find also that sometimes as designers we communicate in really formal or really structured ways. Like I saw one of your tweets a little while ago that said like, designer plugs in computer, and then before the tweet could finish, it's like, other designers ask, what type of feedback are you looking for? And it's like, it's just so true, like we have these really weird structures of communicating that are so unnatural. Like, I mean, why don't you just simply check their project and begin there, you know what I mean? So, but also help us to kind of make these really difficult decisions. So, yeah, that's interesting. What part, like, as you're teaching the methodology of all of these design practices, like, how much of the communication side are you also teaching? Are you teaching, like, how to pitch your ideas, once you've arrived at an idea, how to present and all that kind of stuff too?
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually haven't focused so much on that as much. But I think that's definitely like an area that we can help guide people as well, because I think it is very important and a huge part of the whole design process, especially when people are trying to adapt, use either material design or specific patterns and trying to advocate for them, and they're getting a lot of pushback from the stakeholders or even other designers, and being able to help give people tips on like why we should adapt this new thing or whatever, I think is pretty helpful. So maybe you sparked a new idea there.
Workshops about communication.
Yeah, workshops communication.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know we have the Google Developer Experts program, which I know some people on your team are involved in. I think the last, the summit they actually did have a communications session where they taught people how to do improv, which was pretty cool. So maybe my team specifically isn't doing that, but I think there's definitely like other teams that may be helping out in that.
Cool, interesting.
So, well, I want to talk about my favorite topic, material design.
So Omar is our studio's material design advocate.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Makes my job easier.
Yeah. So material design, it's like it's here like from the last 3 years, I think. So, but now we're talking in the design community, the UI design community, about design systems, and it's not a new word. It's not a new thing that is happening now, but there's like this conversation about it. But material design was or is one of the first modern design systems that went out, and now it's evolving into into new parts of of Android, Chrome OS. There are some things that we're seeing new, mostly on web. But how do you see the next steps for material design, evolution? What more? Maybe you don't know what's next for material design.
He asks eagerly.
Yes, please tell me. I can't comment on that. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think you've seen the shift, and I wasn't a part of Google when material design was like first announced. I do remember very eagerly like watching it from home. I was like streaming it live on YouTube on my TV, and Matthias Duarte introduces the material design, and I'm like sitting here going like, like finally, like yes, because
Coming from Holland.
yeah, like someone that always followed Android very much. One of the hardest things as a designer as well was we always got a lot of like, oh, well, Android sucks at design. Like Apple is where it's at in terms of how they created, especially for user interface, which I would agree. I mean, I think they've done a great job. And for me, it was that moment of like, okay, they finally get it. Like they're focusing on this. Like this is something that's important to them. And so that was really exciting to see. And I think, I think there's always been this vision for making material design more of a system. But I think initially the message that was sent out was more of a kind of like a design language to help people. And it really did a great job of bringing a lot of the cohesive design across web, mobile, Android, as well as iOS, and as well as the desktop and the Android Wear, like anywhere material design is shown in a lot of areas. So it really was a great way to kind of bridge that and bring that all together. But you had to start somewhere. And I think one of the big focuses that we're seeing, especially with all the tools that is coming out, like we have the color tool, we have Remixer, which allows you to make some design edits live in your app without having to compile a new version, Gallery, which is great for workflow. I mean, a lot of other great tools in there. We're really changing from focusing just on the design language or like the design system of that, but creating a system that allows you to design with material easier and faster and easier, whether that's by the tools or the guidelines, as well as the components, which are a great thing, which is actually just like the code of all the material design components available on Android, iOS, and web that you can quickly grab from GitHub and start, prototyping really easily. So I'd say it's just the focus of, it's not changing focus as much as it's opening up and branching out to provide, make it easier for designers and developers to create great products.
Yeah, we're not seeing a new material design 2.0. We're seeing new tools. I think that was the whole gap that as designers and developers have. Like there were less tools like 1 year ago. Now Android Studio gives a lot of tools for this, even for designers to work with developers. And that's
And I reckon that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with the explosion of new systems and tools and methodologies, and it also seems like we kind of work with a lot of methodologies here in the studio too, and sometimes it can be interesting and challenging, kind of colliding these methodologies and seeing how they can work together, like agile, lean, sprint, human-centered design, all of these kinds of things. So when you're kind of coaching designers through this process, are you constantly staying up to date with new methodologies and new tools, or do you kind of have this is what works and we're going to teach you, and then you can kind of go off and adapt that?
I think we always focus on human-centered design, less focus. I mean, human-centered design is really at the core of everything that we do, just because we do, we want to create products that humans actually want to use and want and like, so that's always at the core. And yes, there are instances where you do kind of have the whole lean MVP type of thing, getting something out there and iterating. I think that's still kind of a part of the human-centered design process.
Sure.
But I think we're less focused on, running after what's new, and more on, seeing what is working, and maybe adapting it. But it's not necessarily like, oh, there's this hot new thing, like let's go rush after it. But at the same time, even when it comes to tools, we are always seeing like what are designers focusing on. I mean, if you look at a couple of years ago, it was all Adobe products, which a lot of people still really use, and we still support those a lot. But we also see this shift where a lot of the designers are moving to Sketch, and so being able to provide sticker sheets and stuff for Sketch as well. So I think it's a combination of being aware of what people are gravitating to and being informed in that, but it's not necessarily like chasing after the hottest new thing.
Yeah, sure. So, but obviously, like yourself as a UX designer, you keep up with these latest trends and things like that. So, I'm interested about kind of where are your sources of information? Where do you go to find out about what's new and what's trending?
Yeah, a lot of
apart
it's
from the
Lavada. I mean, that's it. Yeah,
number
exactly.
one.
A lot of it's mostly from following people on Twitter and just kind of hearing what they're up to and whatnot. Again, there's a lot of great UX design like newsletters and whatnot that I always keep up. And of course, what is it called? Is it ux.cc? UX? I don't remember. I'm terrible. See, I'm so terrible at remembering specifics. But always just kind of looking at what people are up to. And so yeah, a lot of it comes from social media in that regards.
Right.
Podcast. Your favorite
Podcast, favorite podcast. I can't comment on that.
Yeah.
I don't want to break any hearts. Well, here we go. This one's fits. Here we go. Yes, that is a great show if you're interested in tech. Still love everyone over there. But we do have two shows on the Google Design Notes, which is hosted by Liam Spradlin. He's another design advocate who started around the same time I did. He originally had this podcast beforehand, and then he brought it to Google, and they kind of revamped it and did a really nice job with it. The quality has just been really great, and so essentially he interviews creatives, designers, and just kind of wants to hear more about them and the work that they're doing and how they approach it. So it's a great way to get inspired. And then we have another podcast called Method Podcast, which is really great. It's an individual, and oh goodness, now I'm forgetting his name again, who interviews Googlers, and they all talk about different products. Like Rachel Bean was one of the last episodes he did, and Rachel's amazing. She works on the material team. Yeah, she's great. And so it's just really good. You get really good perspectives from inside Google, as well as Design Notes focuses on more of the external. So those are great podcasts to kind of get some inspiration and hear how people are approaching problems.
Cool.
And what about books? What are your
Books.
top 3 books?
See, I'm so bad at reading. I do audiobooks a lot. Is it going to be terrible if I say the Design Sprint book?
Shameless plug.
I mean, it's not necessarily us. Books are harder. Yeah, I don't know if I have. I have like some that are popping up, but I'm terrible at reading. I just listen to audiobooks mostly, but it's less focused on design, most of just like randomness. So.
Cool. Right on. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. What do you think, apart from soft skills, what are some areas that designers should focus on, for the future? Like, there's been this trend of behavioral economics verging kind of into design and psychology. What are some?
Neuromarketing.
Yeah, what are some areas that designers could focus on to improve their skills at design?
I don't know if I have outside of like soft skills. I guess it's getting. I don't know if this one is more specific to the skill itself, but like bringing it back to focusing on not being sold on just like one idea and being open to receiving feedback. And I guess that's still more of a soft skill, but being able to just articulate your designs a lot faster, whether that's through sketching or lo-fi prototypes. Anything that really helps you be able to share ideas and receive feedback without it being this like pixel perfect creation that you can't get away from. But I think that other than that, I mean, I would say design systems is like the biggest thing that we're seeing, especially with people taking the material design guidelines and the system that we've created and incorporating their own flavor and their own brand to make it their own. So exploring that and how to create cohesive design in that, I think a lot of designers do have a difficulty when they're creating a product to think of it as like a screen or view instead of like the components that build that screen or view. So I would say kind of thinking about it in that way would be a good thing to focus. Like, sure, those components all have to play well together to make this beautiful thing that you're interacting with, but try to think of it and building it in small components so that you can put together like a design system. I think that's a big thing, and just exploring different ways of how your brand could be introduced through different ways of the system.
And you're an advocate of pen over pixel. Tell me a little bit about like a time that applying that idea, because we really want to kind of jump to our computers, but sometimes slowing down and taking things really physical helps the creative process. So do you have a story about a time that really worked?
Oh, I'm trying to think of let's see if it's specific. I mean, I always usually start with that. So I mean, like all the products that I've done, usually kick it off with that. I think even the way that my mind works is that I naturally start thinking of things in terms of components or little blocks of things that you can rearrange and take out. So that was really helpful for me, like when I'm building a site. So I guess like one of the products that I was working on before Google, rebuilding a state schools site, and they had like a lot of content. There was a lot of stuff that they wanted to get like on the homepage, and rethinking of that. And one of the things that, as I was sketching, even just using sketching like on an 8.5 by 11 paper, is that I caught myself going like, oh crap, no, maybe that's not top priority. We should move that lower in the list. And then I would have to start going all over to like sketching again. But one of the things that I developed was the idea of sketching components and then rearranging those instead of sketching the entire view on the paper. So that was really helpful, because then it allowed me to quickly move all the parts around instead of like, here's the final product and then there's nothing else. So I think that was a good example of like, okay, like this really did help me in terms of moving things around and kind of iterating quickly even within the sketching phase versus if I were to go straight to pixel or sketch or like start moving things around. I think I would have like just been like, oh, that looks good enough, and moved on.
Yeah, that's something that we often do here at the studio as well. As we draw components out, we draw kind of pieces that we want, and it could be storytelling, like it could be narrative points that we want to hit, and we sometimes take it to paper and literally cut them out like preschool and like stitch them together. And for me in writing copy, and I know that in Sarah's the same, it's been really helpful like to structure a narrative as well, because certain beats that you want to hit with the content you're trying to present, but to be able to kind of stitch it back together in certain ways and configurations and see how that changes the overall story that you're telling a user is fantastic. Yeah.
It's awesome.
At the end, that's how material design works. Well, just I think we're mostly done with the time, but I want to talk about something that we were talking in the show about AI, artificial intelligence, and now we're seeing Google taking the approach of combining not just software and hardware, but adding AI to the formula. And we're seeing that with the hardware units, the new hardware lines, and you're mostly a user of the hardware line of this new approach. So I have myself 2 Google Homes.
No one,
two. No one. But my question is more about it's like 2 months since the launch of the products, but you already have some more deep thoughts about how this work. This is working like on the Pixel or on the Google Home, your own home. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think the thing that always drew me into Google was the ability to make it easier for me to do things without like me thinking about it, or providing helpful things that I will need but I didn't have to initiate. So if we looked at something like Google Now, when it was first introduced, of the idea of providing you, like, if you have a calendar event and you have the address listed on there, it's going to provide you a notification by looking at the current map and looking at the traffic and saying like, hey, it's traffic's more than usual, you want to leave by X amount of time to get there on time, to get there. So thinking of those things, I think, are really powerful because you didn't have to initiate anything. Like, I mean, you provided that information already via your calendar invite, and and then it would connect to the traffic on Google Maps, and it uses all the information that it has to kind of build that, which I think can be pretty powerful, without you having to go in there and check stuff. Like, that's an example of that. I think if we look at the new Pixel cameras in terms of creating the portraits, it's pretty fantastic. I took the Pixel with me on my trip to Disneyland with my family, and I captured like some great portrait modes of my daughter on a ride on the teacups, and it's just like amazing that a lot of that was actually done through software.
Having two cameras.
Yeah. So it's pretty great when you explore what can be done, with all of that. So I think it makes for a really exciting time. I think that what's the author? Golden Krishna, who wrote the book "The Best UI is No UI," it actually works at Google now, and I think that approach. I mean, it's something great to explore. To thinking about, what if you could enter your house by it knowing, like, not even having to really interact. It knows that you're there because of your phone or whatever means necessary to do that, and being able to like unlock or provide other things. So I think it's just about thinking of really smart solutions that you may not have to interact or actually choose to do. But of course, the whole thing you always have to weigh out is, okay, is this cool or creepy? How do we make people feel comfortable with it, right? Because like a lot of times you're like, oh my gosh, how did Google know this or whatever? And, but maybe you just tell them more information than you think you do, which can sound creepy. But if you go into your Google account settings, it'll tell you all the things that Google knows about you, and you can delete that. So privacy is like a big thing that we definitely like take care of. It's really important to us, and letting you be able to control that data as well. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to explore, and I think even more so as designers, focusing less on the pixels and also just thinking about it as solving a problem, and exploring that, because there's a lot of different ways that you're interacting with computers now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and just before we wrap up, is there anything you'd like to plug now that you have all of our listeners engaged in the cool and creepy scale?
Well, I mean, when this goes out later today, we do have we have a couple events in Mexico City, which are great. There's one tonight, Span Mexico City, which is really exciting because it's an event that's bringing a lot of creatives and designers from the local community to here. So it's going to be a fun event I'm really excited about. As well as there's another event on Friday morning, or it's a whole day event for World Usability Day. And it's going to be a mixture of Googlers as well as Google developer experts. I know Lulu from 23 Design is going to be speaking, and I'll also be speaking in the morning. So it's just a great thing to come and participate and be connected with the community here, the design and tech community in Mexico City. So yeah, we're just really, really excited to be here.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Woo! Yay.
All right.